Welcome to the People Journals. Have you ever thought about why African Americans living in predominantly white countries often face economic hardship? It's difficult for black individuals to achieve wealth in a society dominated by white people. Before you respond, let us explain how the system is structured to prevent financial success. Only a handful of individuals manage to break free from this cycle, while most remain trapped in poverty. This isn't a recent issue, it's been happening for centuries. White people have historically exploited and oppressed black communities, seizing their wealth and ensuring their continued impoverishment. Will this cycle ever come to an end? Let's explore the history of African Americans in the United States. It's a story marked by resilience, struggle, and triumph. From the painful journey of capture and enslavement to the liberating effects of the Emancipation Act, black communities have endured hardships that would crush the spirits of many. Despite overcoming immense challenges, echoes of discrimination, inequality, and intentional sabotage persist across generations. One significant factor that weakened the black community in the past was the deliberate efforts to prevent their economic growth. Although some aspects of this oppression endure, how did white people manage to keep black individuals impoverished even after slavery ended? With the hope of freedom from slavery, African Americans envisioned a life free from oppression. After slavery ended, the time that came was filled with challenges for black Americans. Jim Crow laws and segregation rose up, taking away the promise of freedom. This made equality seem almost impossible for black people. Even though slavery was over, the gap in wealth between black and white people stayed. It was like the chains of slavery were gone, but the ties to poverty were still there. Trying to get financially stable and successful was really hard because there were so many barriers in the way. Basic things that everyone needs for a good life, like education, became a battleground. Black people struggled to get quality education because of unfair treatment. The idea of having the same chances as everyone else was destroyed by unfairness. This left many black people fighting to get the resources they needed to make their lives better. But finding a good place to live, like a house, was also tough. Housing, which shows stability and progress, became a place where unfairness continued. Black families were forced into neighborhoods that were ignored and didn't have what they needed. Owning a home, which shows real freedom, was often blocked by unfair lending practices. This just kept the cycle of inequality going. Leaders have played a big role in all of this. There were many times when they could have helped, but they didn't. One important moment in history came after the Civil War. General Sherman did something significant by signing Field Order 15. This order was a big deal because it planned to give 400,000 acres of land to black families who had been enslaved. It was a step towards helping them become financially stronger. But sadly, President Andrew Johnson changed things. He cancelled the order and gave the land back to the people who used to own slaves. This just kept black people from getting ahead. General Sherman's order was a hopeful moment back then. It showed that people recognized the need to make up for the terrible things that happened to black communities. The allocation of land wasn't just a symbol, it was a real attempt to help black families become economically independent and successful. But this hope didn't last long because of President Andrew Johnson's actions. His decisions went against the idea of equality and making up for past wrongs. Some policies were made that left black people out. The GI Bill and Social Security, which were big parts of a set of laws called the New Deal, were supposed to help everyone, but they didn't really help black people. Instead, they made things worse by continuing unfair practices. For example, rules about where people could live and who could get loans made it hard for black Americans to benefit from these programs. The GI Bill was meant to help soldiers coming back from war get education and homes, but black soldiers couldn't use it the same way because of unfair housing rules. These rules stopped black people from owning homes and passing wealth down to their families. Redlining was an unfair practice where certain neighborhoods were labeled as risky for investment because of the race of the people living there. This made life even harder for black Americans who were trying to benefit from government programs. Redlining made it tough for them to get loans and other financial help, especially if they lived in these labeled areas. It basically cancelled out the good things the GI Bill was supposed to do. Does this still happen now? Yes, the struggle for black Americans to build wealth is still happening today. Even though there are lots of jobs, black people often face discrimination when they try to get them. They also get paid less than white people for doing the same work. This makes the wealth gap between black and white people even bigger, stopping true freedom for black Americans. After slavery, there were more challenges, especially with the legal system. Black people were unfairly targeted and put in jail more than others. This keeps happening and hurts black communities for generations, making it hard for them to succeed. Even in healthcare, which should be fair for everyone, black people face problems. They don't always get the same quality of care or access to healthcare as white people because of past unfairness. The challenges faced by the black community in achieving overall well-being are made even worse by some things. Now, let's talk about the reality of black people owning land today. It's really sad. Back in the 1900s, African Americans owned around 14 million acres of land. But now, in the 2000s, almost 90% of that land has been taken away from them. Today, they only have about 1.1 million acres left. How did this happen? Well, it's a sneaky process. Things like property taxes and a law called the Torrens Act are used to take land away from black people. These might seem like normal bureaucratic things, but they have big consequences. There's also something called heirs property, which sounds harmless, but it actually makes it easier for others to take away black-owned land. When families share ownership of land, it's easier for outsiders to take advantage of disagreements and sell the land off. Even though property taxes are supposed to help local governments, they often hurt black landowners. Sometimes they can't afford to pay the taxes and end up losing their land because of it. The Torrens Act was supposed to make land deals simpler, but it actually made things worse for black people who own land. This act, despite aiming for efficiency, hides the true owners of the land. The lack of transparency makes it easy for corrupt people to take control away from black landowners. This doesn't just affect numbers, it hurts the economic power of the black community. Another way black people are kept from getting ahead is in the job market. It's a key place for building wealth, but it's especially tough for black people, especially those with names that sound black. Studies show that people with black-sounding names get 10% fewer callbacks for jobs. Discrimination in the job application process is a big problem, making it harder for black people to get good jobs. Even before they get to the interview, they face bias because of their names. This unfairness in the job market blocks them from getting the same chances as others with neutral-sounding names. This unfair treatment doesn't just affect individuals, it also has a big impact on the overall economic health of the black community. When black people don't have the same chances for jobs, it holds them back from moving up in their careers and staying financially stable. This shows up in things like the wage gap and fewer chances to move up the economic ladder. It's like a cycle that keeps black people from getting ahead. The issue of economic disparity between white and black communities in many countries, notably in the United States, has long been a subject of discussion and debate. Despite legal advancements and social progress, the gap persists, raising questions about the underlying systemic factors that perpetuate this inequality. This essay delves into the various ways in which systemic inequities continue to keep black people economically disadvantaged, examining historical legacies, discriminatory practices, and contemporary challenges. To understand the present state of economic inequality, it's essential to explore the historical roots of oppression and exploitation faced by black communities. The legacy of slavery, followed by Jim Crow segregation laws, created a foundation of systemic racism that continues to shape socio-economic dynamics today. During slavery, black labor was exploited to build wealth for white slaveholders, depriving black individuals of economic agency and opportunity. Even after emancipation, discriminatory practices such as sharecropping and convict leasing continued to exploit black labor and hinder economic progress. Legal and institutional discrimination. Throughout history, laws and institutions have played a significant role in perpetuating economic disparities between white and black communities. Redlining, a discriminatory practice in housing and lending, systematically denied black people access to mortgages and investments in desirable neighborhoods, perpetuating cycles of poverty and segregation. Similarly, discriminatory practices in employment, such as hiring bias and wage disparities, have limited Black individuals' access to stable and well-paying jobs, further exacerbating economic inequality. Education disparities. Access to quality education is often touted as a pathway to economic mobility. However, Black communities have historically faced disparities in educational opportunities due to systemic underfunding, segregation, and unequal resource allocation. Schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods often lack adequate funding, experienced teachers, and essential resources, perpetuating a cycle of educational disadvantage that hinders economic advancement for Black students. Criminal justice system. The criminal justice system disproportionately impacts Black communities, perpetuating economic inequality through mass incarceration, biased policing, and discriminatory sentencing practices. Black individuals are more likely to be arrested, charged, and incarcerated for similar offenses compared to their white counterparts, resulting in barriers to employment, housing, and financial stability upon release. The cycle of incarceration further entrenches economic disadvantage, limiting opportunities for education, employment, and economic mobility. Healthcare disparities. Access to healthcare is fundamental to economic well-being, yet Black communities face disparities in healthcare access, quality, and outcomes. Structural barriers such as lack of insurance, healthcare deserts in predominantly Black neighborhoods, and implicit bias in medical treatment contribute to poorer health outcomes for Black individuals. Health disparities not only impact individuals' ability to work and earn a living, but also perpetuate intergenerational cycles of poverty and economic disadvantage. Wealth and asset inequality. The racial wealth gap, characterized by significant disparities in wealth and asset ownership between white and Black households, is a stark indicator of economic inequality. Historical injustices such as slavery, segregation, and discriminatory policies have systematically deprived Black communities of wealth-building opportunities, including homeownership, access to credit, and intergenerational wealth transfer. As a result, Black households have significantly less wealth and fewer assets than their white counterparts, perpetuating economic disadvantage across generations. Environmental injustice. Environmental racism exacerbates economic disparities by disproportionately exposing Black communities to environmental hazards, pollution, and toxic waste sites. Predominantly Black neighborhoods are often located near industrial zones, hazardous waste facilities, and pollution hotspots, leading to adverse health effects, property devaluation, and economic disinvestment. Environmental injustice not only impacts residents' health and quality of life, but also undermines economic opportunities and community development efforts in affected areas. Systemic barriers to entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is often touted as a pathway to economic empowerment and wealth creation. However, Black entrepreneurs face systemic barriers such as limited access to capital, discriminatory lending practices, and lack of business support networks. Structural inequities in the business ecosystem, including procurement policies, contracting opportunities, and access to markets, further hinder Black-owned businesses' growth and sustainability, perpetuating economic disparities in entrepreneurship. Intersecting forms of discrimination. It's important to recognize that economic inequality faced by Black communities intersects with other forms of discrimination based on gender, sexuality, disability, and immigration status. Intersectional identities compound economic disadvantages, magnifying the impact of systemic inequities and barriers to economic opportunity. Black women, disabled persons, and undocumented immigrants face intersecting forms of discrimination that limit their access to employment, education, housing, and healthcare, exacerbating economic inequality within Black communities. Resilience and resistance. Despite enduring systemic inequities and economic disadvantages, Black communities have demonstrated resilience, solidarity, and resistance in the face of adversity. Grassroots movements, community organizations, and advocacy efforts have mobilized to challenge discriminatory policies, advocate for systemic reforms, and promote economic empowerment initiatives within Black communities. From civil rights struggles to contemporary social justice movements, Black activism continues to confront systemic racism and demand transformative change to address economic inequality and ensure equitable opportunities for all. The persistence of economic inequality between white and black communities is a testament to the enduring legacy of systemic racism, discrimination, and injustice. Addressing this entrenched inequality requires comprehensive and intersectional strategies that dismantle structural barriers, challenge discriminatory practices, and promote economic empowerment initiatives within black communities. By acknowledging historical injustices, confronting systemic inequities, and amplifying the voices and experiences of marginalized communities, we can work towards building a more just, equitable, and inclusive society for all. Do you think black people can ever become rich? How can we end this unfairness? Should the government step in to help protect black people's interests? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think black people will ever get the same chances as white people? If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get notified anytime we post a new video. God bless you. Amen.